So, Shimon, we were just talking about the differences between tactical mode of thinking, and moving a designer so they're operating at the operational level. Mm-hmm. And so what I offer is, if we can return back to the metaphor of the maze, what makes us effective at the tactical level, courses of action, centers of gravity, lines of it, all these things, these are analytic tools of reductionism, and these make us very good at beating the mazes while you're in the maze. But all those tools do not help you above that in this, what is essentially becomes the maze of the designer's mind. And so sometimes we'll see people try to use these analytic methodologies at the design level and insist, oh no, it'll get me out of the maze. So they keep going back to the tactical. And what you're talking about at this synthetic level is breaking out of your own mental maze.
Yeah.
It's a totally different plane.
But again, you see the difference. I mean, there's some issues going back to your context. I mean, looking at what we do and the way we approach design, the way we link it to operations and strategy, to the level of generals, and the way you're not at the moment you're not dealing with generals, and be aware of that. You see, there's a kind of tension that you should be aware. Your audience, the people that you actually educate, are junior officers.
Junior mid.
That are totally, I mean, their whole existence is focusing on the tactical realm. Again, I'm talking to you now, be aware of that. So the way I see it, your challenge is much bigger than ours. Because in our case, you see the linkage, there's no tension between the participants of the course, the audience that we serve, our clients, and their realm of functioning. It's the same. I mean, they come here, it takes some, I mean, they are undergoing some pain, and it varies between the different individuals, which very much concerns their transition from tactical, focused functioning to which is based on the existing world, the existing organization, on doctrine, on planning, and it is all linked to execution of action, to the realm of abstractions, abstract thinking, creating an alternative world. Dealing with problems that you haven't experienced before, are totally new, trying to very much explain them logically, and ending with developing a form of intervention that will not necessarily solve the problem, deal with the problem, or help you not overcome it, but deal with the problem, intervene in the problem, and then see later. Well, we all aim to solve the problems, but we know that when we solve a problem, we are creating a new problem. In our case, once the guys have overcome this, psychological, individually, obstacle, there's no problem. They actually realize that this is exactly, they are doing here what they're actually supposed to do in the real world of what they function. It is different with you. The people who come to your course are people who are actually junior officers who are supposed to serve or help their commanders to do design, but they themselves, you see, it's a dichotomy. It's a kind of, how we call it, fractured, personality. They are tactical entities. They live in the world of tactics. They are planners, but they are supposed to do things that are totally detached from their world. And by doing that, they are supposed to help. This is a kind of tension that you have to pay attention to. And honestly, I cannot give you any prescription for dealing with it. That's your problem, guys. I mean,
our students,
in some senses, we have taken the easier path. You see, we have taken the easier path. I mean, by the way, we already covered. You see, when a general, you give a general, you're making a remark, you're asking him a question, you're criticizing him. He is a general. He can say, "Okay, let me think," or "I accept your criticism. Okay, let me think how I solve it. I deal with it." Or he can say, I go and do my business, and I'll get back to it later. By the way, with me, although I'm more experienced, I've been a general, they'll be a bit more cautious. Ofra has never been a general. I mean, try and imagine her position. And even with me, sometimes they just, they don't see me, they don't hear me. And we know that we have to wait patiently, and then another opportunity will occur, and then they become more aware that they are going in the wrong direction and trying. So in our case, it's easy, relatively easy, because there's coherence. I mean, they're generals, and design thinking is the way generals think.
So generals are almost the juggernauts that can break free of the organization. For example, effects-based operations is a useful example.
Yeah.
It became popular in the 90s.
Yeah.
It used some elements of systems thinking.
Yeah.
Then a general officer with a decree said, we're not using it anymore.
Yeah.
But only a general could have done that.
Exactly, fantastic. It's a good remark. Yeah, good point. Very good point. So, you see, in your case, how you actually overcome this tension, how you deal with this tension. Guys who live in the world of tactics, but are supposed to be design magicians. I mean, create alternative worlds. Hey, guys.
Now, this leads to my question, though, which is where we've established that the general officers, the change agents, the juggernauts, they are the ones that can break free of doctrine and of all these practices. Yeah. They can break out of the maze easier just because of the nature of the instruction, the level of responsibility and experience. But our students, and for a lot of people that are doing design within these traditional military organizations, that are trapped in a tactical, but they themselves are seeing, well, this isn't working. This analytic process isn't working. How can they, we like to use the term Trojan horse, how can they use design to sneak in the disruption, the destruction, the deconstruction, even if the organization may not be ready for it, or they have to convince a strategic sponsor of the value of that design?
Yeah, it's a big question. I mean, mega question. Again, I cannot give you recommendations because you are living in a totally different cultural context than us. But you see, what you have to do, I mean, institutionally, is to approach simultaneously, find a way to approach simultaneously both the general audience and the level of performance. I mean, the guys who actually perform design, in your case. You see, now we, in the IDF, we train, we educate a group of people, I mean in Israel, I mean to understand design, the challenges, and then develop the tools for performing it, and then they're going back to their job. And we actually expect them not only to perform as generals doing design whenever they confront an emerging complexity, but we actually expect them to be the teachers of their own staff, to teach design. This is why we don't teach majors and lieutenant colonel. We expect the generals to do that, while they are actually grappling or struggling with real world emerging problems, complexity. but we also expect them to be epistemologists. In other words, to look at the problem, realize that they've never, I mean, it's a complexity, they've never encountered anything of that kind. Look at whatever, I mean, the inventory of patterns, of doctrine, organization, and then find a way or develop a mode of thought that will enable them to rationalize this unique singular complexity, make sense out of it systemically, develop the strategic appreciation about transformation, and then develop a singular operation. So these guys need to be kind of epistemologists. I mean, and we actually deal with that. In your case, you see, the problem is that you can teach young, I mean, audience comprising of young people. If you tell them epistemology is important, they listen. But then when they go back and they approach a general, the general will tell them, "What are you? I mean, don't confuse me with all these words, with the aniglogy, epistemology, ontology, all this. I mean, I mean, give me the plan, give me the courses of action. I mean, and all of a sudden they are confused. I mean, really."
So the Trojan horse here for some of our people that aren't generals would be going back to this element of epistemology, which I think is critical here. So at that tactical level, once again, trapped in the maze, doing the JPP, the NATO OPP, all that stuff, they will look at, center of gravity, my enemy. I will do a center of gravity analysis. Should I follow Strange, Iron, Chem, Riley? How should I structure it? Should I make the critical vulnerabilities over here? All that is trapped in the tactical maze.
Right, absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Not aware of their epistemology because they're just thinking about methods.
I mean, when we're looking at your materials from the highest level, I mean, what is being taught in the War College, the Army War College, or the various war colleges, or the National Defense University, which is the worst, I think. I mean, NDU. You've been tacticizing any potential. You've been reductionist. I mean, you've reduced, potential for really thinking systemically about emerging issues, and you've tacticized them. And the whole process is tactics, analytic, reductionist. We actually, you see, in the past, we used to look at you as a source for inspiration, for insights for us. Today, when we really want to manifest to our audience how you shouldn't do things, we take you as examples, guys. I mean, not you. I mean the materials of NDU. We've been using
National Defense Strategy.
A text, the text, National Defense Strategy, we've been using the text of the Army War College.
Yeah.
Look,
as an example of functional thinking.
These guys are crazy, are totally crazy. Look, the whole idea of design is to create space or frames of orientation for the planners to really plan the various pieces that brought all together, form the operation. So design actually precedes planning. That's all. It starts with planning, then they go to design, and then they get back to planning. Guys, you're crazy.
So going back to the epistemology of the centers of gravity as an example,
the
people who are unable to think about their thinking at the meta level will just keep following cogs. The design part, which I think you're saying, and I agree with you, is it's easier for a general to say, why do we even use cogs? It's a Newtonian physics metaphor. Here's where it started being used. Here's where it supposedly came out of Clausewitz, but here's where it got garbled in translation. Here's where it got overemphasized. And the designer then might say, well, cogs are a Newtonian physics example of an organizational format in nature. But in nature, you also have rhizomes. go into Blues-Gattieri.
Yeah.
So the rhizomic structure is completely different than the cog, but the rhizomic structure, there's no example in a tactical maze linear analytic process.
Moreover, using these elements, I mean these universal elements like cog, for example, or lines of operations and lines of, I mean, actually reduces the whole process. Again, you guys are playing with words, talking about innovation, but actually by using cog, I mean all these the elements of design, which are universal, you actually kill the learning. You kill the potential for innovation. So you're using the word innovation, but you do the opposite. Well, I mean, mentally, cognitively, it's crazy. I mean, moreover, when a guy look, in our case, the whole idea of rationalizing the other, the opposition. By the way, in our case, we spent more time rationalizing not the enemy, I mean the real enemy. We are rationalizing the blue enemy, my bosses. And again, in American terms, this is dangerous. I mean, what do you mean? My boss is my enemy? My colleague is my enemy? My ally is my enemy? He's not your enemy. He's, by really conceptualizing his differential, the different characteristic, or those differences that characterize him, that make him different from you, you actually reinvent him, and you create for yourself this really huge space to identify how you can manipulate him, collaborate with him, bring him in, embrace him, because it's not a matter of physics. Now, when you use cog, lines of opposition, you actually reduce the whole issue into a physical matter. I mean, a physical level. It's reductionist. Because it's all about inventing the logic. You see, only by inventing his logic, which is a way of fabrication, the whole idea of system of opposition, you invent the enemy. It's not that you go into his place, put yourself in his place. You invent the enemy. By doing that, first of all, mentally, all of a sudden you enable yourself to look at yourself from the outside. By creating the opposition, you enable yourself to look at yourself from the outside. You actually liberate yourself mentally, and all of a sudden you can see your weaknesses, your biases, and then you can, of course, cover all this, but also by creating the enemy, which you will never have an absolute guarantee. You see, when we talk about targets, when we are very much thinking about the enemy in terms of physics, it's simple.
There's not much creativity.
But there's no creativity.
Yeah.
But there's no risk. Because what you see is what you think about. And what you think about is what you hit, or deal with, or disrupt. In our case, the whole idea of constructing the opposition is what enables you to deconstruct him later. That's the whole idea of design. And you cannot make a differentiation what's innovative, creative or not. You see, you have to create the enemy. There's a big risk here, because you can never know if you're absolutely right. And this creation or this fabrication is based on physics, but also is based on imagination or on abstract thinking that you actually have to perform in order to create this entity. And when you actually come to a decision that I'm pretty much happy with the way because you also perform under constraints of time, etc., you enable yourself to deconstruct, to disrupt. When you see what you've created, only when you create and you see what you have created, you can disrupt it, you can fragment it, you can break it. Otherwise, it's too simplistic. I mean, there's no.
You get trapped in that tactical maze, and this goes back to the risk thing. You said there's so much more risk at that operational level of the designer.
Absolutely.
Because
mental risk.
if you're wrong,
good point.
You're done. But the beauty of the tactical model right now that's being brought all the way up to the highest levels of the general officer.
Another risk, by the way, that you have mentioned is, and this is something you mentioned earlier. You see, a tactical designer, when he all of a sudden becomes aware of the fact that existing doctrinal issues are an impediment, are an obstruction, or let's say they stand between the way he framed the issue and the way he wants to actually execute or to deal with the issue, he won't be able to make decisions. Well, I deconstruct the doctrine, I change the doctrine, I ignore the doctrine. A general can do it. A general officer can do it.
The risk is higher, but the rewards are greater.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The risk is much higher. The rewards are much higher. But sometimes you see why we are becoming communities of practice or mediocres. I mean mediocre because we are not ready to take the risks. Only by taking the risks, and you take risks by creating alternatives. Only by creating in your mind an alternative, you take huge risk, but that's the only way you can actually perform what you're supposed to perform. And when people retreat back to the doctrine, to the existing organization, to planning, no risk, by the way.
It's safer because we can retreat.
Absolutely right.
Retreat
it's
to the
safer,
tactical.
it's safer, it's simpler.
The enemy has a vote.
And it creates an illusion that it actually works. It doesn't.
And what we can say is if the general or the senior leadership, they say, well, did you do the center of gravity analysis? The doctor says, yes, we did.
Yes, we did.
Oh, we'll do it again.
Well,
if you stay down there, you're tacticizing the operational, but you're always safe so that you can't get fired.
It's a discourse of monkeys. I mean, they all say, yeah, we've done COG, we've done lines of operations, we've done. And everybody's happy. Yeah, we know what we're talking about. But this is, again...
it's so much more dangerous to go to where you're saying.
Oh, yeah. It's We use the term the blind leading the blind. Familiar? I mean, this famous Peter Bruegel's painting, the blind leading the blind. Everybody, I mean, we are all blind, but we are all we are very much living in an illusion that we all know the way. When we follow the blind. I mean, but the whole idea is that the designer is an eye-opener. I mean, he creates something different, explains it to the people who work with him or are supposed to perform under his command or with him, collaborate with him. He has to convince them. He has to sell the new logic. This is why he has to use modes of manipulation, mental manipulation, not physical manipulation, mental manipulation, to convince them. Or be ready to accept a position and then reframe. But then, once he's done that, the whole community becomes a real community of practice. I mean, people who understand commonly the issue, not just mumble words, mumble jumble, all these words that actually say nothing, imply nothing, but really share the new understanding.